So a lot of my investigation surrounds the cop gang now, which I'm gonna call Pig Gang. A lot of it started with child trafficking. Child trafficking that was connected up here in the Northwest with an attempt to abduct my child. With that, I kind of went a little psycho about it. Naturally. I love my child a lot, and people that attempted that pretty much pissed me off in every fucking way. One of the things that I know about the child trafficking route is that cannabis, heroin, and fentanyl dealers also double as child traffickers up here in the Northwest. So, the things that led me into investigating the cop gang. So, this is a personal experience. I'm a witness and a victim. I'm going to tell you about the targeting aspects of the whole idea. Is that when I was doing my investigation of this, I got a pair of speakers and I started ghosting or shadowing, where I would somewhat follow along with the trafficking tapes to see if I could identify anybody off of that. It's like a Silk Road, and it's like a interconnected gang. I've made lots of explanations to the methodologies that they use, but essentially I was listening for the tapes on the trafficking tapes. My hope was one of two things. One was to be a potential person to find a child. I was more than prepared to intercept the child if that ended up being anything. But mostly I was just trying to figure out what their trafficking methods are, and that listening to the audio trafficking tape gives insight into how to do that. So essentially that led me all the way to Las Vegas, to where I left Las Vegas and I hitchhiked up to essentially Newport Beach, Oregon. There I essentially was following along one of these trafficking tapes, and it led me to a job on a boat, fishing boat. And so then, essentially, I needed a job at the time anyways. And so basically, what I found was the boat owner and his son and then I was listening on the trafficking tape, and that essentially the trafficking tape was about picking up a child at one of the small little beach towns that each one had a trafficking tape to be essentially putting a child inside of the boat, and then the trafficking tape would turn on when we went out to sea to fish tuna, and then there was yachts around. And the trafficking tape essentially, see, this is where I was trying to figure out the exact people and the exact, like, what, where, who, how kind of stuff. And so there wasn't any child, so it's like I just kind of followed along. I just listened to it, and I took notes in a memory way. Basically, one of the things about having a photographic memory is it's not difficult for me to completely recall everything. Essentially, where we were fishing would have been GPS pointed on his computer, and any real investigation would show essentially GPS points of where those trafficking exchanges happen. And also, like, essentially, it's Garibaldi. It's kind of like, that's where at Garibaldi, we were just sitting around all the time. This is what I noticed about the trafficking tape is we would just sit around for like 3, 4, or 5 days. Part of the trafficking tape led me to one of these sleazy ass pedophiles who attempted a form of hypnotism at me. Honestly. And that basically, like, essentially the boat would pull in with a child, and that then the boat itself would become a brothel. And so, as I followed along in Garibaldi, essentially people show up to the campground that's right next to the docks, and that was where one tape led to an exchange at some RV or something, and that then the other one led to a couple of Mexican drug traffickers, because one of the tapes was for transferring drugs. Those drug traffickers, they left. There was no drug exchange. See, I was just listening to the tape, and I was just kind of walking, like, oh, okay, wants me to go here, or something like that, all right? And that wants me to go here or there, kind of stuff. And that then, essentially, the stuff that were around me, it would basically say to do an exchange of some sort. The RV, that was a child tape. The 2 Mexican dudes, that was a drug tape. Didn't mean nothing to me, but it was part of that stuff for Mexies and heroin and weed. So then, Waco, that is where there was, essentially, we waited around there for a while, and waiting around, I would go and follow on the tapes into the city. Essentially, they were tapes that would sometimes turn on for essentially what would be a rich client that was, see, they end up doing a bunch of stuff on the tape, like eating fish and chips at the stereotypical fish and chip stand. There's like other things on it, okay? There's stuff that everybody had to do. I was familiarized with what that idea was. Like I say, those fucking people pissed me off so much that essentially I was attempting to see if I could be right at the moment, because I would have called the police. I would have called the police if there was a child. See, the whole idea is that while I was responding as if I was on the tapes with all of them, I wasn't really responding to some of the other aspects to that stuff. That's where, essentially, over the course of a few weeks, it was probably determined me not being a part of their little world. And the whole idea is that I know their pedophile language, but I don't speak that at all. That would have been the main indicator of me not being a part of this stuff. And so that was an aspect. That would have been the main indicator. See, they do everything in like an intuitive second language. They do things on the tapes. The whole idea is following along the tapes. Sometimes I wouldn't necessarily be at certain times and places just for whatever reason. Also, I was drinking alcohol. That is another thing that, and I was going to the cannabis store at Waco. That is, that's the other indicators of me not being a part of their little child pedophile trafficking shit. So that's like where essentially there was other tapes that was meant for me to just walk away, and I wouldn't because I kind of needed a job, and that I was essentially trying to get a firm understanding of these stupid fucking pedophiles in all ways. So that's what led me to essentially just randomly, he paid me off and I left the boat. You know, I was planning on getting another fishing job, and essentially he had like, I had like the extra tough boots, and he like grabbed them out of my bag, and so then I just fucking threw them off the boat. The fucking stupid little pedo pig or pedo, basically. And so with that, he snapped. I saw him drive by, just fucking raging pissed. From that, when I waited around, basically, I found like one place where they dispose of a child in Coos Bay, like a GPS point. I sent the FBI a GPS point on it where the tape is where they dispose of a child in Coos Bay after all that stuff. And so with that, I was kind of just waiting around because essentially after a while, these tapes progress. And then I follow the tape, a new tape, that led me to a bro dude. Those dudes are always involved with this stuff. And that bro was running away. It was a runaway tape, so to speak. And so I walked up, and he agreed to drive me to the Souths as long as I paid for gas. So essentially, I had money, and that I was basically shadowing that tape. It's a cross-country trafficking tape. Mostly it's for drugs, but it's also for children. It stops in Logan, Utah, by the way, but we just kept going. It's a trafficking tape. He didn't have any drugs on him. He was running away. What he was doing was finding a homeless person, essentially with some money, which was kind of what I would represent at that moment. And he wanted my ID and all the paperwork, my birth certificate, social security card was all in there in my stuff. So essentially, what happened was we got all the way to Jack Beach. He said that he wanted to go to the beach. I didn't really think much of it, okay? And that essentially he waited for me to get into the water, and then he walked back to his car and he drove off. Then, with all my stuff. That is where then I went up to one of the beach houses nearby. I called the police. A Jack Beach cop responded, refused to make any report, and this would have been like 15 minutes after he drove off. And then he drove away, and I was like, well, fuck. And then I called the dispatch again. And the same one responded, and then he just refused to make any report, basically. And so then, essentially, I was stranded at the beach. Essentially, I was still, the tape kind of shut down. And so I was pretty much, by that time, it was like nighttime. I walked it was in a different place from this, but to Neptune Beach, basically. And so then I fell asleep at the beach. I was raped at the beach. I woke up. It was, I don't know, probably 4-ish, 3-4 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was around. I flagged down some Dodge Charger pedal banger or something. I asked him to call the police. Nothing ever came of that. And then I went to like a Home Depot strip mall where they had like a street sweeper or something. And I asked him to call the police or an ambulance. That's what I asked for, an ambulance. And nothing came of that. So then workers started going into the Home Depot. And then I asked them. And then finally, Neptune Beach police showed up. And then, you know who else showed up? The same Jack Beach cop that refused to report the theft of all my stuff at the beach, the same one showed up in the Neptune Beach area. So then I explained that I was raped at the beach. Then that cop threatened to throw me in jail for filing a false report. And then I was like, all right, well, okay. And I had just been raped. And he threatened to throw me in jail for a false report. He wouldn't even report it. He wouldn't report theft, and he wouldn't even report me being raped at the beach. And so then I was like, all right, well, I want to get an ambulance. And he like refused to get an ambulance. And then he said he would drive me to the hospital. And then you know what he did? He dropped me off at the gas station down 2 blocks or 3 blocks down from the hospital. That's what he did. That's what this guy did. And so that's what I'm getting at. So that's where the tapes, I also, when I was interacting with this person, I started getting audio tapes that he was getting. I was getting audio tapes of this person too. And that this situation was essentially about this person bringing like probably, well, it would have been like up here we have a lot of homeless children. It would have been about him bringing homeless children to Jack Beach, which is what the trafficking tape for children was. Or any child. I mean, it would have been any child, but that is where at that time I figured it, because like Spokane has shit tons of homeless kids and shit. 15, 16-year-old. And then all of a sudden this pig, and that essentially the trafficking was about dropping the child off at the beach and then some beach house being there and then this pig showing up. And then essentially the tape itself ends up being a sex psycho-y rape tape, basically. And that essentially is like where that stuff just like didn't really work on me, basically. And that is where this cop became the focus of everything, basically. And so while I was in Jacksonville, I started listening around for more of these trafficking tapes. This is where I found the Neptune drop-off, or the yacht drop-off tape. I like listened to it, the child trafficker would have had a car or something, would have been at a place and a time, and that then a yacht would have came up, and that is where I was basically like figuring out the logistics of everything. This fucking pig has a lot to do with that. And so that is where then I started putting in tips to the FBI where I would get no response. And so then I eventually I kind of, and then, it had a lot to do with the library. In the library, there was a tape to like be molesting kids or something. Basically, like somebody would bring their kid or a kid or something like that. And then that is where that was one of those tapes. Basically. And so then, essentially, it had a lot to do with the preschool at the First Baptist Church. Also, that's where one of the other tapes led. And that's when I stumbled upon a courthouse terrorist plot. That's when I started making tips. Okay, see, I was doing this. I was like researching this shit and essentially in undercover investigative journalism. Okay, that's what I was doing. And so, oh yeah, I know what cops do with these videos, you guys. I won't be afraid. All they're trying to do, this is what it is. This is why they have these discussions that I monitor. This is what it is. This is why I monitor them. Because I'm not going to be afraid of their stupid, like, pedo double fucking doctored evidence shit. Okay? Okay, stupid pig? I know you guys are lawyers talking. I know everything about what you people do. Okay? I've investigated you people for fucking 5 fucking years. They'll be cutting and pasting. They'll be trying to justify taking all my evidence and all my notes and shit. And they won't. In the end, they'll just be trying to optimize themselves to be fucking kids and their S&M and shit. That's what they'll do. And then essentially they'll want some sort of access to my profile to be placing sound in an illegal, like, torture and the suicide way. That's the other thing that they do. That's what their justifications are. That's why they doctor shit. I mean, that's pretty much everything that they do that for. So, I'm not going to be afraid of that. Nobody can make my speaker like that right now. Basically, this is where, hey, if they're going to use that profile of mine, then this is like why I'm awake right now. Because I'm listening in on these people that are speaking about me. And then they sit around wondering why they don't get somebody's profile or something. Basically. And so, the reality is this is what led me into making a whole series of FBI tips and shit, and then no responses, and then I spoke with FBI agents, and then I gave them enough information that they should have interviewed me, and I knew that. I know the proper protocols that they're supposed to make. I went up to Augusta. I immediately called the FBI. They responded, and I told them that I had information about a terror plot. And they said, how am I dying? Kind of like when I informed Hanford Security about another terror plot based on these child trafficking tapes at Energy Northwest. See, anytime that it changes over, it's a different contract. See, there's a child trafficking contract, and then there's other terror plot style contracts, and that it's like, I don't have to do that stuff because I'm not a blackmailed slave or whatever, and that's basically it. But that didn't stop me from shadow listening on what those tapes are about. That was one of the things that I was researching. And yeah, it led me into essentially being right next to these people. Right next to them. And you know what I do? I'm a wizard. I don't give a fuck. I'll be right in your fucking face researching you, and you'll be too stupid to fucking realize it. Because that's just what it is. See, you people, somebody tried to abduct my kid once using those fucking child trafficking style tapes. And so then I went right in your guys' faces and figured out your guys' cross-nation network. Because I'm a fucking wizard. So then I started to investigate more about Cayman Island pedo bang pigs. Because every time I went to Homeland Security, all that stuff. Because once I got these people that would just not be responding in the normal way, that's when I attempted a few more police, like a sheriff in Augusta, the FBI agents in Savannah. In Savannah, the local Savannah police responded. She had the Google glasses on. I sat there and made basically a deposition right directly to her Google glasses. So if they have that kind of shit erased, and it was a woman, and essentially it'll correlate with my bus ticket, and the time frame of when the bus showed up to Savannah will be right around when the Google glasses should have the documentation of my interaction with them. And it'll show. If some other dumb pig showed up, the local pig. Huh? And then FBI showed up. Some super cock. And then essentially I started psychologically profiling the other FBI agent. He was smoking a cigarette, looking real sheepish and guilty about something. And so then essentially I went, well, there was a hurricane, and that led me up to Augusta. So then in Augusta, they had these child trafficking kind of tapes. I started following along with some of those to see some of the logistics of a lot of that stuff was about doing like an outdoor satanic ritual. That was one that I found next to the high school that they took us to. And, next to a seminary. And it was close to the Walmart out there. Then, eventually I went and, after the hurricane kind of stuff passed over or whatever, I walked into the city. And I went in the hospital and I asked them to call the FBI for me. And so then I informed the sheriff about having information about a terror plot. And then all he did was tell me to go and get a mental health disorder or mental health. See, they just call homeless mental health disorder and they disregard people, okay? See, that's how dumb it is. And you see that that's literally like, here I was doing investigative journalism and they refused to do anything, and I wasn't incoherent whatsoever. I also started yelling at his stupid little fucking chest cam. And that's where his brain was busy listening to an audio tape. His speakers, he's busy listening to his speakers. He wasn't even having a real, comprehension to what I was saying. He's busy listening to his pedo banger speakers. All right? His cop gang speakers. Everybody in gangs, deputy gangs, everybody in Mexican gangs, everybody in black gangs, everybody in Asian gangs, everybody in white supremacy gangs, they all use audio tapes with speakers. So, yeah, deputy gangs. So do all of you. And so this is like where they don't like anybody talking about the fucking speakers. And that they get their speakers by pedal banging. Because they wouldn't, the dark web would never give them speakers unless they had a horrible fucking blackmail. And that's what fucking pedo pig fucking deputy gang does. They pedo bang and they get these speakers. And then they start a gang with them. Just, you know, they just get mad because all the other gangs don't require. That's just what it is. Being in the police force, you have to pedo bang to even get those speakers. So that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. So be sure and just claim that. Just say that. Just say that. Then they'll throw your fucking ass in prison. Because you rape and kill children and you traffic children for the event. What do you think of fucking investigate? So essentially, it led up to Homeland and Inspector Sprague. And that person, he wouldn't take any deposition about. And then that's when I looked straight at him, and I pointed at all of my information, and I was like, "So you don't want to look or have any interest in this information?" And he said no. And that'll be documented in the Strom Thurmond. It'll be documented on December 26, 2017, inside of the Strom Thurmond building in the foyer. And you'll see, I'll be on my knees. I'll be like, look, I got all this information. You guys don't want to look at it. It's essentially where I got a release. I told them that I wanted to talk to somebody with a clearance. And that I got a full release on all of my information. And that I didn't actually even need that, but I was trying to be courteous to this situation. Because I had found a bunch of pigs that were involved with a child trafficking route that included local, county, state, and federal, and it included FBI, and it included Homeland Security. So I asked to talk with somebody with a clearance because I know that they have to get background checked, all right? And I was right next to a nuclear base, so somebody there would have had a top level Q clearance. And then it was next to Jackson Base, and somebody there would have a top level clearance. And that I wanted to speak to somebody in national security because a bunch of fucking pigs got terrorist information shoved in their fucking faces, and that they weren't doing anything because they were pedo banged on a fucking child trafficking route. And that since I know everything about that type of stuff, I thought it would be nice of me to be speaking with a man with a clearance, with a national security style clearance. I wouldn't have cared. They could have brought over the person from DOE and I wouldn't have given a fuck. Because more than likely, there's probably some sort of plot that goes there also. But see, I wasn't close enough to the base for that to be anything. That's what I'm getting at. And you know what their response is to everything? Train. And it wasn't. Because why was that shit in my speaker? And why were people ripping me off? And why was somebody raping me at the beach? That's not training. So if your guys' tapes were training, then why is it that I followed along those and then also would get sound tortured in them periodically? That's not training. So that's what I get at. These people that I went and found, these players essentially they're all Republican pedo bangers, and yeah, that's like where right now we're in Joe Biden's administration, and that yeah, they'll probably believe me over all of you. And see, pigs, see, Jack Pig, I documented that shit at a hospital, a Baptist hospital, and you see that I completely remember everything about this stuff, and that was in 2017. You see how much I can recall from all of this? Wow, look at how I can recall all that stuff from that.